my placement students who just finished, unfortunately, working with me. And I'm going to try and look at the camera as well. This is going to be difficult. And Grant Valence, one of my colleagues in Oxford, have been working over the last year, called Spiritum Duo. Spiritum is Latin for breathe, and I work as a respiratory doctor here in Gloucestershire. So this is the reason we thought it'd be a nice name to have. And it's Duo because this is the second, actually it's the third program that we've built in the Spiritum sort of essence. So overview, what we're talking about. Clinician code is a kind of term that me and a few colleagues have coined for doctors that can code. And I would say that I'm able to code. I wouldn't say fantastically, but good enough to get things built for my department and trust. I'm going to be talking about lung cancer, where Spiritum Duo was built for, basically, but I'll tell you a bit about the modular and open source side of it, and the user experience, the digital architecture, and also where we're going next with all of this. So a bit about myself. Here are some of the programming languages and sort of frameworks and libraries that I've been involved with, and I would say I'm quite happy using them. So I've automated my whole house with Arduino, which is a dialect, as you probably know, is C++. Microsoft Access was where Spiritum, the first app we built, was built in there in 2009, 32-bit, and using Visual Basic for access applications even, sorry, and AutoHotkey and Python, Django, and I really need to spend some time learning some JavaScript and TypeScript. I've been saying that for the whole year while we've been building Spiritum Duo, but I've just not got around to it, as we've been trying to build things and get people aligned with this cultural change in our trust to actually work with us on this new digital build. Now, clinical informatics background, I'm a council member of the Faculty of Clinical Informatics. I almost did a Freudian slip there. We're trying to get Royal College status, but we're still just a faculty. It's basically where anyone that's clinical, doctors, pharmacists, nurses, midwives, and so on can go that have an interest in digital health. I'm a board member of the NHS PyCon, so Python community, and I'm a student at the moment myself, MSc student, just completed the PG DIP for the digital leadership from the NHS Digital Academy, and just finishing off the paperwork to be a visiting fellow for clinical informatics at Gloucester University as well. So hopefully I'll get a lot more involved here at Gloucestershire Uni as well. My clinical role, as I hinted to before, I'm a specialty doctor. It's a level just below the consultant, the middle grade doctor, and also digital lead for respiratory medicine for Gloucestershire. And I subspecialize in sleep medicine, also work with tuberculosis and bronchiectasis and other diseases, but sleep medicine is where I do most of my subspecialty. Right, lung cancer, the disease. And if anyone has any questions at any point online or in person, just wave your hand or however you do it on Zoom. I'm more than happy to stop and ask questions. We can do them at the end, of course, but you know, it's a long talk. We can break it up if we've got any questions going through. Tiago, you're happy just to, yeah, raise them. Okay, so lung cancer. Not something people think about a lot if you're healthy, fit, and you know, young. But it affects a lot of people, and it's the fourth killer of people in the UK. It used to be the third, but guess who came along? COVID-19 and took third place. Well, there's really a competition, but yes, it used to be the third biggest killer in the UK after dementias and heart diseases. And these are numbers from Gloucestershire of numbers of patients by how many days they are taking from referral until treatment. And it saddens me to see the bottom right, 250 days for one patient to actually go from referral to treatment. And the national guideline is to treat within 62 days, which you can see that on the screen. And highlighted, underlined in the top right, 38% of patients that are treated breach. That means patients that go past that 62 days. And that 62 days is going to be shortened to 49 days. We've had a national lung cancer group that said we need to shorten that. So that number of breach patients is just going to expand. So we need to try and fix this somehow. And we've been I'm thinking about it, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. So I mentioned the sleep service at the beginning, and I wanted to compare lung cancer to sleep. So for a sleep patient, this is a sleep apnea patient. This is a patient that has problems breathing at night, causing daytime sleepiness. There are 9 steps to get the patient from feeling sleepy, seeing the GP, having a sleep study, seeing a clinic, and then having treatment. 9 steps. Lung cancer. Now, I know there's not 34 to 87 steps up there, but if you look at this box here, this is a box where all the investigations happen. And each investigation has several steps. And these are all the investigations you can do. Chest x-ray, blood tests, refer to get patients off their cigarettes, because cigarettes are risk factor of lung cancer. Camera tests into the lungs, aspirations and fine needles and so on. And then you can refer to other people. And each thing that you add adds several steps. And the most complicated patient that I could document was 87 steps. So compared to 9, there's a lot of steps, and each step takes days, weeks, and that's why you get these patients that breach that take a long time. And these are all the systems that we have to use to get that patient from A to B, from referral to treatment in Gloucestershire. Now, they're all digital apart from the top right one. So why not take all the, why not take all of them, including the paper, and just digitize and automate it all into one system? Each system you have to open up, log into, remember the credentials because they're always slightly different. You know, find the patient, do your thing, close it. Why not one system? 15 different clinicians involved in that pathway. The GP sees a patient, or maybe an emergency doctor sees a patient. They start thinking this could be lung cancer. Well, then you need to go down the whole path and get all these different people involved. And then there's a patient as well. So there's a lot of systems, a lot of people, very complicated system, a complex system. Why not simplify it? This is where everyone turns their head to try and read the title on the left because I couldn't fit it at the top. But basically, these are ideas of things that we could automate, digitize, and improve of all those steps that we saw. So import and outcome new referrals from the electronic referral system, ERS, or from the PAS, patient administration system. Alert clinicians that the new referrals come up and that need to do something that day instead of, you know, finding a time later in the day or on the next day or two. Book the patient into the clinic and so on and so on. I won't read through the list exactly. But these are just ideas we had. And I had a lot more, but wouldn't fit on the screen. Right, let's sidestep a sec. So I've taken to where we're about to go with Spiritum Duo, but actually let's talk about what I've done already. So to see, so you can see how we got to, let's build a lung cancer pathway. Because it wasn't like, Mark, just build it. I had to build other things first to see if I could do these things. I've never built digital health apps before, but over the years before Spiritum Duo, I've been doing it. So in 2018, I started writing different things. Spiritum, like I said, Latin for breathe. And this was built into Microsoft Access 2009 database. So as you know, it's not open source. You can't really share your sort of code. You kind of can, but it's not really open source. But I built it in the 32-bit. Just February this year, they changed it to 2016 64-bit. So I have to change all the code to actually handle that change in bits of the variables. And it also incorporated robotic process automation to connect to those other systems. I was doing this by myself, not integrating with the digital team. I didn't know how to. They weren't even answering my emails. So I was just building these things. Didn't have any nice APIs to actually connect to. So I just did a bit of RPA. Why not? It worked. It was a bit slow, clunky. It failed sometimes, but you know, it worked. And I built this for the sleep service, and over a 2-year period, we had a 79% reduction in breach rates. Now, a breach in sleep is 365 days, a year. And so we brought that number down substantially. And how did I do it? I read these 2 books. They're actually really good if you want to learn about Microsoft Access. And over 2019, I wrote and built and tested Spiritum. Now, this is what it looks like. It's a bit clunky. It's a bit old school Microsoft, but it worked. It did the job. It saved our time, our workflows. It's got all the processes built within it, apart from follow-ups. It's financial reason. It's a different system, but it's all in one place. Now, as I mentioned, Spiritum had robotic process automation in it. And actually, it was quite exciting. We thought, well, actually, can we take what we learned from that and actually automate other processes? So we did. And the RPA was built in AutoHotkey. It's a bit like BASIC. It's easy to learn. And it's an open source scripting language. And built it to get data from 9 different clinical systems. It would learn your passwords, store them safely on the Windows Data Credentials Manager, and then it would just put the credentials into the, open the system up, put the credentials in the system, retrieve the data you want, and show it. And also, it would take 4 different paper request forms, digitize them, and email them for you, and it grabbed the patient data from other clinical systems because it could. And we did a mini quality improvement program on this, saved 30% of our clinicians' time. For one clinician, it saved 50% of his time. The other one, it was -1%. So it was variable, but average 30 out of the 9 people that we got involved. And how did I learn about this? Online, there was a fantastic documentation from AutoHotkey. And it was technically open source. So actually my code is available on GitHub. Not that anyone really wants to probably use it. You have to have exactly the same clinical systems that we've used. There are people that use the same thing, so they can use the code if they want. It's available. And this is how it looks. This looks even worse, I think, on the screen than Spiritum did. Very clunky. You can barely see the QS in the top left. It's so sort of pixelated, but that's how it looks. This is the info screen. It shows you all the different things that you can connect to. These probably mean nothing to anyone that's not in clinical, but yeah, let's just quickly go through them. So F2 opens up Sunrise. Sunrise is the electronic patient record system. This is where all your health records are going to be stored. It's like a GP system. Track care is where your bed status is, where in the hospital. Infoflex is letters, PACS is imaging, and dictating and so on. So all these systems you can connect to. Right, sidestep over. Spiritum Duo. So credit, like I said, to Joe and Nick who built this thing and listened to me argue about this and that, and this is how things work and don't work in the NHS or just in terms of health and clinical stuff. And like I said, to Grant as well. And this is a screenshot of what it looks like. This is where you enter your credentials. This is the home page. So this is a to-do list of patients that need something doing. So patients, Catherine Jones has had a PET CT. You need to look at that. Now remember the colors in here. Remember the sort of layout. This is an NHS website screenshot. It's using the same components. And we'll talk about that in a sec. So yeah, it uses the same components, looks the same. Now this is a modal screenshot on top of the home page for a Christian Russell, and there's this bar at the top. We've called it a graphical representation of pathway, GRP. And it shows you over those 62 days that we're talking about, how far along the pathway are they? So they're at 42 days-ish. And that bar at the top can be broken down to say what's happened at different times. But it's a good indication of, oh, how much time have we got left to treat this patient before they breach? Because, you know, we get fined if they're over the breaching time as well. And it says in the PIL, as we called it, on the top right, referral letter +2, that's telling you how many things need to be looked at. And on the screen, you can see referral letter, chest x-ray, and CT chest with a new box next to them. Those are new things you need to look at. You need to acknowledge them, have a look at them, and then actually, this is decision point, as we called it, you need to make a new decision. So if you scroll down the modal, I've done it in 2 screenshots, you come to this bit here, which is where you can click all those different things that you want to ask for. This used to be on 14 different digital/paper systems. Now it's in one place. This is a prototype, I should add. It's not something that's actually working today. It's fake patient data up there. So we can show you the names and dates and dates of birth and so on. Here, other ideas. How about WhatsApp for a single patient? Any message that any clinician or any admin staff, anyone that's supporting, secretaries and so on, that wants to ask someone else looking after that patient on the pathway, why not have all those messages stored in one place that's safe and accessible and retrievable? Because you want to actually find these messages that have been said, like, did you say this or didn't you say this? So audit as well. At the moment, it's just emails or a text message, or actually WhatsApp, to your colleagues asking a question, where why not let everyone know that's involved, what's been asked, what's being looked at, what's going to happen next? And why not have Spiritum do an accessible on your phone? So on the left, let's say this is a push notification. PET CT results are available for Mrs. FA. Would you like to outcome this? Outcome means just make a decision. Middle one, you're going to, would you like to book an E-bus? That's a camera test into the lungs. And then the right one says it's being booked, a swab needs to be taken, and so on. And when you book one of these things, let's say you booked a PET CT, the patient can get a text message as well saying, oh, you've been booked this. Here's a video that actually tells you about the disease or the investigation you're about to have. So it could take you to the video like the front door, you know, to the reception, to the front door of the actual scanning room, to the actual scanner. And the GRP, the graphic representation we talked about before, this is a list of all your patients at different, well, you can see they're all being started at the same time because all these fake patient details are created at the same time, but these bars would be at different stages. You can see who's about to breach first. So this is like your to-do list, but in graphical form. And then MDT. So MDT is an interesting beast, I would say, digitally, even just clinically, if you take away the digital aspect. An MDT is a multidisciplinary team meeting. It's where you get respiratory doctors, you get oncologists, so cancer doctors, radiologists, so doctors that are expert at looking at images. You get secretaries and thoracic surgeons and all these people who have all this specialty knowledge, and they'll look at all the things that are available in front of them, and they will make a decision about what we're going to do to treat the patient. At the moment, we have no fantastic way, good way, or even a poor way to do this. We have a system, Infoflex I mentioned earlier, but it's clunky. It doesn't do things that well. It's good for like storing data, but it's not actually helping progress things and keeping things in the right place and showing what's happening, what's going on next. So why not have something built around that that's incorporated with everything we've spoken about? So further ideas. A simple note section. Let's say the patient calls up. They ask a question to a nurse or a secretary. There's nowhere at the moment in our trust to put notes apart from a piece of paper and into the folder. Now we're trying to do everything digital, trying to put everything electronic. So everything in patients, and there's a big distinction with how hospitals work in the NHS. In patients is you come in with a heart attack, a chest infection, you come in, you stay in a bed, you get treated. Outpatient is, I've had a cough for several months, I'm going to see you in a clinic at some point. So for everything in patients, we do have some note sections. For outpatients, we have nowhere to write a note down. For inpatients in the EPR, the electronic patient record system, so you could say that might do some of the things we're talking about here, but we wanted to have one system that does everything. Graphs and statistics to show you how well you're doing as a service, where your bottlenecks are, trying to, you know, if you can see them visually, it'll be easy to actually tackle them. Inbuilt audit functionality, because you can see when someone's made a decision, what they are thinking at the time. If they deviate from that standard pathway, you might have to say why you've done it, and that'd be good to look at later. So, oh, that makes sense why they've done that. Where at the moment you'd be like, well, I don't know what they were thinking. I don't know what I was thinking at that point in time. And speed runs and, you know, gamification. I gave a talk, when was it? I gave a talk to Tiago about speed running and how we could use it in the NHS. I got a few smiles from you lots about how you could do that. And I'm really interested how you can take gamification, game theory, and actually something as serious as medicine and cancer, actually taking that theory about how to get through that complicated 87 steps, like was 84 steps, get through all those steps in the fastest way possible. Be interesting to look into that. Now this is more for my clinical colleagues, this page, but I'll put it up there anyway. So there's lots of standards out there. And if you ever get involved with clinical stuff, you'll hear about GIRF, get it right first time, and the National Optimal Lung Cancer Pathway, 62 days, like I said, at the moment, going to be 49 days. The NHS service manual, which is actually quite a good service manual when it comes to digital aspects, talks about making everything open source. Get the end user involved. Some very interesting things. And I've been thinking about this for the last 2 years. And I don't know what Joe, who's in the room here with me, thinks about when I say this, but I think everything clinical is a pathway. You can take any disease, you can take a chest infection, you can take a heart attack, you could take bowel cancer, you could take a leg operation, and they're all about the patient has a symptom, has a problem, they present to a doctor, they have investigations, they have treatment, and then they're done. Or they have repeat follow-ups and more treatment. And they're all the same. So why not build once and share many, which is what we try to do here. And the potential benefits, which are kind of talked about as faster pathways, better patient experience via the tailored patient information videos, which I sort of went through before with the pictures. Reduce the staff workload, so getting rid of all those credentials, all those logins that you have to remember and do, have it in one place. Improve staff experience of managing the lung cancer pathway and aligning with those strategies that I mentioned from higher up the NHS levels. Right, so I'm going to talk to you now about the build of Spiritum Duo. And I'm not going to pretend I understand all the technology exactly, because I didn't technically build this, unlike the Spiritum and Quick Spiritum before, the database and access and the RPA program. But very, very much involved in the weekly sprints and talking about what we're going to build and if it's working for me as a clinician or not. We had regular show and tells of the frontline staff. We had a stakeholders meeting. So a stakeholders meeting technically means getting everyone that's involved, the radiologists, the oncologists, and so on, to talk about what the problem is, how they can see a solution, how we can take things forward. We had that here in Gloucester University, just across the way. We had a Jira project management tool. We used that. We're still using that, all the backlog that we have for the next build when we get more students, or even myself, I might be building it next year. We'll see in the next few days to do with funding. There's lots of there on the backlog to do. And we did continuous integration, continuous deployment as well. We got a Git organization. We were building a diary or build diary. You can actually go and see the code if you want at github.com. Spiritum Duo. Oh yeah, I also spoke about this work in the Let's Talk Digital conference that we had in March of this year, and we're going to have another conference for Let's Talk Digital in June next year, the 15th of June. We've just booked the room. Was that intentional, lights going off? Okay. Right, so this is an overview of the sort of the technology architecture. We've got the user interface at the top, the sort of back end in Docker, middle bit, and then the data, which is stored in the trusts, apart from the bottom left, the Spiritum Duo Postgres SQL, is all the data that's stored within the trusts via, as I like to think of it, as sort of a switchboard. It's even like a telephone switchboard, the TIE, the trust integration engine that connects all the disparate systems in the trusts. And there's a lot more than just the 5 there, but that's the 5 we've just thrown up there for sort of explaining how it all connects up. And I'll go through this. Please don't ask me too many detailed questions about the technology, but I'll go through this. So the front end stack, written in TypeScript. As a lot of you know, this transpiles to JavaScript, static typing, and no runtime type information, so you run coercion. Now, I never got around to learning, I've written some JavaScript, but I never got around to learning how to write proper JavaScript and writing proper programs and using TypeScript and all the unit testing and so on. But I asked Joe and Nick, can you learn this and can you go and build it in this? Because I think this is the way to do it, because browsers, as you know, use JavaScript as the main sort of programming language. It's a progressive web application. So it allows you to download the app onto your desktop, onto your phone. And the prototype we've got, you can do that. It allows push notifications. We haven't done that yet, but it's there, it's available. It's a single page application like Facebook. So you've got your separate back end and front end and API connecting the two. and you serve the front end as a static bundle to the browser. Now, I've been trying to understand hooks. I'm not going to actually try and explain hooks because I don't actually get them. I've been researching them, but it's something to do with actually your state and actually connecting different components, state from components and something like that. Someone probably smarter than me can explain that even to me at some point. But we use React for our front end. And then we use GraphQL as our protocol to communicate from the front end to the back end rather than a RESTful API. And the reason we did this, and it was Facebook again, wasn't it, that did GraphQL? It's because you get rid of this waterfall API calls. It's all done in one call. And we use NHS React components. There is a library out there where you can go and look at these components for React. And that's how we got the look that looks very much like any other NHS or even government website. They use the same color schemes and layout and buttons and functionality and highlights and so on. And we did unit testing, and we used Storybook to look at the components themselves. So that's the front end in a nutshell. And then the back end, the Spiritum Duo back end, is written in Python. Now, I love Python. I can write Python, so I understand most of Python. I've automated my house in Python. Yes, and you can build just about anything. And we use Ariadne as the GraphQL server on the back end. I thought it's actually quite a good system from what I've seen of it. And Starlet and UVcorn as your proxy server, your ASGI server for Python, allows push as well. And it went via an Nginx web server. It took a long time for us to figure out, well, us, Nick and Joe, to figure out which libraries and frameworks to use. We were using Graphene via Django framework before, which is my idea, but then we all realized that it didn't do async very well, so we got rid of that. So we've used these servers. And AO data loaders and Facebook again. We seem to use Facebook stuff a lot. Yeah. Now this is something that we came up with over the last year, and I don't know if it's an easy concept to understand or a difficult one, but I'm going to try and explain it, because this, like I said, everything's a pathway. Well, then I started thinking, if everything's a pathway, what is the basic building block of a pathway? And I came up with this idea of a request workflow unit, and it works on a data level for your database. It works on a workflow clinical level. So you have these things called decision points, and that's the blue blocks at the top, where when I showed you that modal before, it is where you see some results, then you decide what you're doing next, and you make a decision. You send off a request to whatever system needs to receive it. Let's say you're doing a CT chest, it gets sent off to the CT chest program. The patient gets asked to come in, they have their CT chest, it gets reported, and then you get flagged up that you need to look at it, and then you do another decision point. And if you add loads of decision points and requests together, you get a whole pathway like this. So top left, referral letter, hopefully everyone can see that online and in person, it's quite small writing. And there's the serial, and then you start thinking, well, there's series and parallel components to this. So if you go with the series right across the top, referral to surgeons, that's the pathway finished. But you can see after the second decision point, 4 things were requested. A PET CT, which is a special CT scan using radioisotopes to look up for cancers that are active. They absorb these radioisotopes, which are basically sugar with radioactive components on. Lung function workflow, there's the ECG, so electrocardiogram, looking at the heart conductivity workflow, and the bloods workflow. Those all happen at the same time. Now, if one of those things or those 4 things was abnormal, suddenly the pathway had changed. So this patient, let's say this patient's got cancer, but it's a small cancer and they're fairly fitting well, so they can go straight to the surgeons. Let's say the bloods come back and they say, oh, they've got nasty liver metastases, so cancer in the liver. And suddenly, oh, they're not fit enough for surgery. They're going to have just chemotherapy, and that changes the pathway completely. So each decision you make comes back with a result, and each result can totally change the shape of the pathway. I probably should have done an abnormal pathway or not a simple pathway, just to show how complicated it can get. But anyway, that's the request workflow unit. And so the data structure is based off that as well. Now the trust adapter, let's go back actually. Here, the trust adapter, yeah, just this bit here. It's part of the back end. As you can see, it connects to the trust, the switchboard, to all the data in the trust. And it's just some code that decouples Spiritum Duo's front and back end from the digital architecture of the back end. Spiritum Duo doesn't care what's going on in the back end. It's the trust adapter that cares. It communicates what's happening in the front of Spiritum Duo with the back data of the trust. And you just change that trust adapter for each trust, which a trust is a set of hospitals, a grouping of hospitals. We've got 219 trusts in the UK, 1,200 hospitals in the UK. And the trust adapter connects Spiritum Duo to potentially any trust. You just need to change that adapter. And all the data that's not patient specific, or data that doesn't or can't be stored in the trust data stores, the stuff you don't want there, you know, your credentials for logging onto the system and logging in and out times and stuff like that, that's stored in a PostgreSQL database of a Geno mapping library. Continuous integration, continuous deployment. Very much wanted this from the onset, and I think we just about got it at the end before Nick and Joe stopped working with us on the 2nd of September, wasn't it? Yeah, 2nd of September. They've both gone back to studying. So the way this works is GitHub actions. Every time you committed, a GitHub action will happen, and all these different tests, unit tests would happen from the front end, the back end, and so on. Pseudo tie is basically the fake patient data, where we can go and look at that and connect to that, and automatically deploy to the staging server, and then run tests on every commit. And we almost got it running every day, being able to do a CI/CD every day. We're very close. I think it's every 2 or 3 days. Right. I've said a lot so far. Any questions before I go on to the next bit? No? That's fine. How are we doing for time? We're fine. Okay. Right. So this is kind of, we've built Spiritum Duo. We've prototyped it. We've shown it to the digital team in my trust. And we've learned a lot. But sadly, we're not going to be using Spiritum Duo in Gloucestershire. What we've learned from it, we want to take a lot of the learnings about request workflow units, how we want to make things happen all in one place, trying to simplify things, digitize things. We're going to take those learnings and we're going to integrate them into the trust's electronic patient record system. But all the open source, the modular stuff, the powers that be have said no. Well, I don't take no and just sort of stand there and take it. I just go, all right, how can I take this forward? So Grant, my colleague, Grant Valence, he works in Oxford University Hospital in hematology, where Joe works as well now. And we decided we're going to continue this work with Spiritum Duo, but on blood cancers instead. Why not? So, hematology cancers in Oxfordshire. 21,000 anti-cancer drugs are prescribed each, well, in March, actually, just 1 month of this year for blood cancers. Now, they have electronic prescribing in Oxford, but for each prescription, you have to manually open the system, you have to find the patient, you have to click the drug you want, you have to put the right dose in, you have to send it off. And also when a patient starts any of these drugs, and even after they've been on them for a while, you need to have blood tests. Again, you need to log into the system, you get the point, and send off the bloods, and the patient has to come and get them done. Someone has to check them. Does it ring a bell with kind of the ideas that we've had with Spiritum Duo? Making requests, looking at the results, decision point, make something else happen. So we're going to take Spiritum Duo and use it to help with these hematological cancers. And there are patients falling through the net at the moment, because at the moment, there's no spreadsheet even. There's no system that keeps all these patients. And of the 3 diseases that we're going to be looking at, I think there's 800 patients. They're not on a list per se. I don't even know where they are exactly. And so you can't remember when a blood test needs to happen for them. You can't remember which blood test you need to look at. You might not even remember that prescription needs to happen. There's lots of holes in the net to fall through. And the problem's only getting worse. Now, my MSc in digital leadership is on exactly this problem. There's 40, so it was, I think 4 years ago, they did a survey of empty vacancies for hematological consultants in the UK. There's 47 empty slots, and they think that's numbers risen over the last few years. And there's no system, like I said, for managing these numbers, and the number of drugs are increasing. We've got, for all cancers, there's 300 different types of drugs. And they're just increasing and increasing and increasing with biologics, with small anti-cancer drugs and so on. So the problem's just going to get worse. We need to do something about it. So why not use Spiritum Duo in Oxford? And that's something that's going to happen whether I get involved or not, which is nice in Oxford. But it's going to be hard work because it's just Joe and Grant doing it, and they've got so many other things to do. I think maybe only 10% of their time is going to be devoted to this. That's the feeling I get. Not because they can't, not because they don't want to, but because there's just so many other things to do. We've applied for some grants to hopefully get some more students, even maybe pay for myself to go to Oxford. So we'll see, come and make sure this happens. We'll see. The next few weeks will be quite interesting. So yeah, we want to get Spiritum Duo happening in production, not just prototype, in production in the Thames Valley, which is where Oxford is. And the Thames Valley Cancer Alliance, we put in a bid for them. There's been interest from them, and hopefully in the next few days they'll let us know if we got it or not. Yeah, and it's going to be money for a few students, or even myself doing it. It depends on a few other things. Watch this space. And we need to get the stakeholders meetings to get all the hematologists and the radiologists, patients, I think, to see what they want to get from the system. Do they want a patient portal where they can see and figure out when they're going to need to come into the hospital next for their blood test? And I like to bring it back home, build it out there, because I couldn't make it happen here in real life, in production. Of course, we built the prototype here, but I couldn't get the production version happening here. So show benefit and bring it back. That's my plan. So thanks to SWAG, which is the Southwest Cancer Alliance Group, so Somerset, Wiltshire, Avon and Gloucestershire Cancer Alliance Group, and the Gloucester CCG, which is basically the sort of, this has changed names now, it's ICS, but it's basically the funding body for the region. They actually gave us the money for our 2 students, so thanks to Nick and Joe as well. The NHS X Innovation Lab helped us out at the beginning of the year. They gave us direction, they gave us almost purpose, and also they gave us the standards to work against. They gave us a 6-week sprint with them to figure out exactly how to make this work, how to make it look. They gave us the idea of using the NHS React components, and that's how it looks so nice. I think it looks really nice and looks professional. Thank to Grant as well. And if you want to hear any more about what we're doing, and if you want to get involved, we've got the Twitter account, Let's Do Digital CI, so Clinical Informatics, because there is a Let's Do Digital everything else, actually, when you start looking. And there's a letsdodigital.org website where we keep things up to date. If you go to the .co.uk, that's some council website, actually, so don't go to that one, go to the .org. And we're having I'll get your phones out, scan that QR code. We're having another Let's Do Digital quarterly meeting, hour talk at 11 o'clock on the 21st of October this month. And that QR code takes you to the Eventbrite link. We've got some very interesting talkers. One that I'm most excited about is Dr. Paul Atkinson, who is the ICS CCIO, lots of abbreviations there, but ICS, your integrated care system, it's the Gloucestershire-wide system for all the funding that's going to happen within primary care, secondary care, so GPs, hospitals, and social care and community hospitals and so on. So CCIO, Chief Clinical Informatics Officer, so the big doctor who understands digital for the region. He's on the ICS board. He's going to hopefully make some fantastic changes around here. Praying to the gods that be. And he's going to be talking about the ICS digital strategy in the next few weeks. Now, the ICS came into being in July this year, so they've been thinking about the strategy, been getting ready to roll it out, and Paul's going to drop that bombshell and see what we're going to do. It's going to be quite exciting. We've also got, not to forget the other two people talking, we've also got a patient advocate talking about how we can do things digitally, and we also have the lead for the Southwest Genomics team talking as well about things with the genome. Right, I've spoken for quite a long time there. I'll stop and take any questions.
I'm trying to handle that as well, Mark. So I think we can probably stop the sharing.
Okay.
And we can go with the online first, maybe, because it's probably easier to handle the face-to-face ones. So online, anyone would like to ask a question? And you can see how tall Mark is.
I don't have a raised hand icon on my screen, but I do have a question.
Yeah, please go on.
My name is Laurie Mosley. I'm a retired academic and I live in the forest. I'm very interested because A, I used to be a governor of your hospitals.
Very good.
Yeah. And B, I'm now under their care as well. So I'm fascinated by what's going on. It's not for cancer yet, so fingers crossed. But my interest mainly, and I used to teach Pascal years ago. My question though is to do with the data you get. Once you see lots of data, I think, aha, opportunities for learning. Has anybody yet approached you yet with the idea of doing any machine learning on it? Because it's all very well to do the best thing that you know possible for the patient, but of course, hidden in the data, there are always new and better ways of doing things. Is that being picked up, or are you considering it as a possibility?
So the short answer is yes. Now the long answer, I think Thiago and his team want to bite my hand off to get machine learning involved with all of this. I want him to bite my hand off. Now, the reason I laugh at this is because with everything's strategy, culture eats it for breakfast. And as I'm trying to expand on that a bit more. So yeah, we want to get machine learning involved. I've actually done a bit of machine learning myself to try and actually vet sleep referrals. It's impossible, I realize, because even us doctors don't know how to vet them properly. We can't guess properly if a patient from a history, if they're going to have sleep apnea syndrome or not. So how can you ask a machine to do it? And I realize you need much simpler questions that, a day-to-day person can answer. And yes, there's lots of data in the NHS. Now, in terms of the data being shared across to the right people, that's happening with the data analysts in the higher up NHS digital. And each trust of the 219 in the UK submit data up to NHS Digital, and they do fantastic analysis. They have open source. They have laptops that allow them to program in open source. We can't do any open source programming in our trust, and quite a few can't. But there is this amazing data analysis going on at higher levels. Now, in Gloucestershire, we only just got our EPR, electronic patient record system, in summer last year. We've only had it since summer last year. So before then, everything note-wise and requesting-wise, well, not everything, mostly everything was on paper. So we've only just got it. Now, if you Google NHS Skunk Works prolonged stays, you'll find an interesting article by the NHS Skunk team from last year where they did some machine learning on patients that came in to predict if they would have a prolonged stay. And so there's lots of interest from that. Now, interestingly, I don't know how much you know about machine learning in the NHS, in health in general, but my take on what I've read is machine learning is amazing stuff, but in health, it's difficult to really predict things. Imaging, yes, you can do edge finding of cancers and masses and so on, and imaging is quite good actually, and we want to use it. But actually taking a patient's history and you can say the same symptom in 100 different ways and asking a system to learn that, it does at the moment, in my opinion, get things wrong. Now, that being said, there's a lot of money being thrown at machine learning. 250 million has been thrown at this in 2019, I think it was, for the NHS AI labs. So there's money and interest higher, but actually showing real results, there's not that many powerful studies showing that machine learning has yet, not to say I think it won't, but has yet shown real benefit. That's a long answer.
Okay, could I go on that? I think I probably agree with you about the history of it so far. That's largely because very few people know about it. They think that humans can do it and machines can't. And for really complex problems, often it's just as well to use a machine or even better. And I think that's
Can I stop you? Can I stop you there? I like your point that humans can do it. Now, if you get 4 cardiologists to put down a diagnosis, you'll get 10 different diagnoses. Yeah. This is true. This is not a joke. Yeah, I mean, it's funny, but it's not a joke. This is true. And I shouldn't say just cardiologists, any specialty, but I just took them for an example. Even humans can't agree on things. So how are you going to get a binary result from a system when humans can't even do it?
Because the machine can take account of probabilities much more accurately. And with the coming of neural nets, it's doing some quite remarkable things as well. But I agree with you, we haven't got the data in the state yet. We need it.
But the data has human biasm, isn't there, as well? So, I mean, this is interesting philosophical stuff now, and I could talk about it for hours.
I would say that the diagnosis might be, if you ask Dr. X, he will say it's lung cancer. If you ask Dr. Y, it's something else. And the machine might conclude that.
Yeah.
If I can add on that, because this is one of my research areas as well, so it's very, very good comment, Lawrence. I have published a paper with a student and a couple of researchers in the area of using multimodal abstraction to predict early stages of lung cancer. And we use multimodal abstraction to do imaging processing and also doctor notes. And it has proven to improve the current state of the art, which is good. And very good result, and hence why we got it published. But we found exactly what Mark just mentioned, which is the image prediction size, very good, because it's quite clear on the image. But then because we tried to combine the image with the doctor notes, we found exactly the problem that Mark mentioned.
It's natural language.
The natural language
processing it.
Yeah, because you have different comments about the same disease from different specialists. And then when you combine this to the algorithm, ultimately, the notes doesn't help very much. So I agree with Mark on that. I think for image processing, medical image processing, we're quite well on that in the algorithms. But the problem, I would say, Lawrence, it's not just that we don't have the data set, it's that we have the data set. But then when you apply the natural language processing, you have, as I say, the doctor saying, oh, you're fine. Another doctor saying, oh, just have a paracetamol. And a doctor saying, you're going to die tomorrow. And it's the problem I found, for instance.
I agree. Yeah. Therefore, you don't use the doctor as the final arbiter. And you provide this advice, and then whoever is making the final decision has to say, will I believe the algorithm or will I believe Dr. A or Dr. B? Or I've tried 5 algorithms, they agree. I've tried 5 doctors and they don't, I might go with the algorithm.
Well, that's why patients ask for a second opinion, isn't it?
I agree entirely there, but we must talk about this on some other occasions. I've taken up enough of the time here, but thank you very much.
No, that's very interesting. Thank you.
I'll unmute now. I'll mute, Ron.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Lawrence. We have, I think, a couple of questions in the chat. Feel free to read.
Okay, so Jennifer, thank you for your question. Was it the CCG or the Gloucester Royal Hospital Foundation Trust that good abbreviation there, that rejected adopting it? And looking back, do you think there was anything you could have done differently to get them to adopt it? So it wasn't the CCG. They weren't involved with that. It's, yeah, should I name names? That's the question.
It's being recorded.
It is being recorded, so no. But there's several people in the trust that do not think what we have built from a digital architecture point of view, not what we've learned, but what we've built from a digital architecture point of view, should not be done here. I'd love to go to that in more details, but I'll leave it at that. Sorry. Now, the other question from JG. Amazing how far away from integrated systems use the NHS is. So must still rely on the patient asking a lot of questions about their care to ensure they don't slip through the gaps. What is stopping your local trust moving on this stuff in a more open and shared knowledge way? All right, I'm trying to understand the sort of the fine detail of that question. What's stopping them? Well, we're trying to do it. We are, you know, but so the GPs, they digitized everything in the 1980s. They've been doing it for years, and they got three main systems: EMIS, System 1, and Vision. They've done it. They're not perfect systems, and I hear a lot of complaints about each and every one of them, but you know, they do the job, they get the job done. But they're a bit clunky, and they're not, you know, web browser based and internet first and all the things that we should really be aiming for. So there's complaints about that. Now we've been trying to, well, I don't know if anyone's actually heard of the National Programme for IT. Unless you've been in the NHS as a clinician, you may not have heard about it. It was the most expensive digitalization project from a government, I think, in the world. £12.3 billion over 9 years. Started in 2002 under Tony Blair and then stopped by the coalition government in 2011. We've been trying to digitalize the NHS for a while. We're not doing very well. We're not learning from our mistakes, and no one's documenting those mistakes. My MSc is looking at some of these mistakes. It's quite interesting reads, actually. There's a lot to learn. Look at Professor Proti if you ever want to get into these sort of things. John Proti in University of Victoria in Canada. Very interesting stuff he's been written about. He's been employed by the NHS several times to try and talk about how we're digitizing things and how we can learn from things, how we should learn from things and take it forwards. He's a retired professor now. What's stopping your local trust moving on this stuff in a more open and shared knowledge way? Right. So like I said, in the summer of last year, we just got our EPR, electronic patient record system. Now that is a difficult thing to implement. It shouldn't be, should it? Let's just digitize everything. It's really hard to do, and lots of trusts have done it. St Thomas's Hospital in London spent £175 million on Epic, which is one of the big EPR suppliers from America, and it's a good one, but it costs a lot to install, and they do it in a fairly quick, confined way. But it's done, it's installed. But that happens over a few years, and the data shows it takes 9 to 10 years to get benefit realization from these big systems. Now we've just put it in last year, so we've got another 8 years, 9 years before we see the benefit, and we're not even finished digitizing everything. So we have digitized most of inpatient stuff. We still have lots of stuff on paper, but all of outpatients, all of the request forms that we're using for lung cancer are still paper. And there's lots of clunky things, lots of things not working together. We do actually use RPA in the trust backend to actually move a patient from one bed to another. It's whatever Microsoft's version of RPA is called, I can't remember. Where was I with this? Oh, what's stopping us? Well, actually, we have to get the basics done right first. We have to digitize things to start seeing benefits. We even got e-prescribing, so that's electronic prescribing of drugs, which is going to make things safer ultimately, but there's going to be a learning curve for everyone. So we need to do all these steps, and our trust, and almost every trust in the UK, is aiming for their HIMSS score, HIMSS, and I can never remember exactly what it stands for, Health Information Management Service score, something like that. Basically, it's an inpatient score of how digitized you are. So have you got an EPR? Have you got e-prescribing? Do you have blood prescribing on there? Breast milk is right at the top. And there's 0 to 7 scores. We were 0.02 in 2019. We want to be 6 next year, I think it is. Next year, or the year after. And that's what we're focusing on at the moment. It's just getting everything digitized. So this is a very long answer, but getting the sort of moving towards interoperability is the buzzword, getting things connected together. That is limited by just doing the HIMSS score, by doing the digitalization of the basic stuff. I can see you've got a hand up there, JG. Do you want to unmute yourself or?
JG, feel free to speak if you want. Yeah, sorry, JG, if you're speaking, we're not hearing you. I can see you open your mic, but we cannot hear you.
Never mind, maybe we'll try later. And any other questions from the floor or
Can you hear me now?
Oh, yes. Hello.
Okay. So sorry about that. You were answering the question right, because what I was sort of concerned about, having sat in some of those meetings 9 years ago on the integrated care record system and the 12 billion pounds, was, do you think the NHS is sort of still reeling from that and therefore gone into a slightly hyper cautious mode where it perhaps needs to come away and come back out from that and be a bit more confident in what it's doing?
That goes to why did the NPFIT fail, National Program for IT fail? And there's lots of opinions on this, but one that I, as a clinician, like to think was one of the reasons was they didn't involve the clinicians. They implemented something from high up and said, this is where you're going to do it, and do it. And then, of course, no one from the front end does anything that way, and they said, we're not working with this, and it failed. Out of the 12.3, 12.7, there's different values. Some people say 10, but still 10 billion upwards of money spent, only 2 billion of benefit kind of came out of it. So there was some benefit, like the PACS system, which is the imaging system, the spine, which is where the patient demographic service now resides. It's like where all the important data about patients stored. Those exist. Yeah.
You know, do we have a lot of insular trusts trying to do their own thing, and therefore not enough learning going around between them, not enough commonality and sharing, as you talked about, by open source standard approach? Because we've certainly seen at the national level things like, you know, online prescription prepayment cards. There's been some really agile work done at a national level to actually do some of that web interface stuff and to get some of those sort of component systems working quite well. I'm just wondering, is this a big stakeholder problem within the hospitals and within the clinician space where we're just not getting the stakeholders engaged? I'm a project manager by profession, so I'm asking the very project management question.
Yeah.
Is it the stakeholder problem we've got?
So the digital team in Gloucestershire have said it's amazing that I'm really involved and I really want to do digital here, which makes me feel like there must be a lot of people that are clinicians who don't want to get involved, unfortunately. So I would argue the case there is stakeholder disengagement. Mm-hmm. It's really difficult. Basically, we need to get people working together on the front line and sharing knowledge. And this is something I want to do. And that's part of the Let's Do Digital, Let's Talk Digital movement that I'm trying to start. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's no funding for that because no one higher up really wants to do it. And then we can start talking about politics and where the money goes and so on. I'd rather not, because that's dark territory. But I do think we need to involve frontline clinicians. We do need to work together. And there are some trusts that like working together, but there is I feel, though I might be totally mistaken saying this, I feel there is distrust between trusts working together. They want to do their own thing, and there's a lot of that going on. There's lots of there's fantastic silo work going on, but siloed work nonetheless, where people are building things and maybe not sharing as much as they could. And why not actually build once, like I said, and share many? Have one trust build one system, another one build another, and then we just share across. So more frontline, more involvement from stakeholders, more clinician involvement, more sharing across trust should happen. But actually making that happen from a political and a cultural perspective is very difficult.
So what's staggering is that we are desperately short of doctors and appointments. That's a clear problem in the NHS generally. You show some amazing information about the pathway, the workflow you're trying to work, and it's staggering. There are 87 steps potentially in it, and that no one is sitting there and saying, let's not think about systems for a minute, let's think about the workflow.
Yes, everything's a pathway. Yes, no, exactly. Yeah, well, we're gonna take some of those learnings and use them in Gloucestershire. So it's not all is lost. But yes, we should stop. We should do transformation. Forget about digital. We should do transformation, and if digital will help, have some digital on it. But we shouldn't be about digitizing. There should be definitely transformation with the aid of digital where necessary. But a lot of things like the HIM score is about digitizing. So, okay, you've taken this piece of paper, you turn it into a PDF or like a smart PDF, and you can click this and that and send it off. Well, that's not improving things. That's just making electronic, and you can look later. There's auditing. That's probably quite good because you can quite easily see that PDF, but that's not putting the data into sort of an indexable state that you can actually research and audit later. So yeah, let's transform the way we do things with the age of digital, with the age of digital. Let's not just digitize.
I mean, I guess this is interesting in that some of my experience, which is in medical device design, life science instrumentation, you're always saying, what is the function you're trying to deliver, and how effectively can you deliver it for the user or the customer?
Yeah.
And you actually start there, and then only look at what the digital solution to that is once you've understood what that workflow, that user benefit or that pathway is, and how you optimize that, and then you look at how you deliver the digital solution. And are we tending to do it the wrong way around?
We are. The simple answer this time.
Yeah. Could I come in on one point?
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Okay, Laurie Moty again. It's a point of terminology. You said we need to share knowledge. My impression is we get a great deal of sharing of opinion, but not very much sharing of knowledge. The epistemology of medicine is quite often quite different from the epistemology of science. That's a hurdle to be overcome. It's something we should be doing in the medical schools, but that will take a generation.
Okay, well, this might scare a lot of people here who are, I don't know if there's actually anyone clinical here. This might scare a lot of people that are not clinical, but medicine is a black art. It's, yes, there are textbook sort of diseases. There are textbook science and treatments and investigations. But actually, a lot of the time, you learn. It's almost machine learning. You learn as you're going. You're practicing medicine. If you think about it, we are practicing medicine. We don't know medicine perfectly, and you might think this is lung cancer this time, but actually, it turns out to be tuberculosis. And so, yes, it is an opinion. Pretty much all of science is opinion, and that's why we have randomized control trials, because we're looking at these opinions and see which opinion's more right than another one. It's not binary. It's not this is a disease or not. It's more of a disease. It's a spectrum. So it's a complicated thing. It really is. And as doctors find it difficult, and then we're asking machines to try and understand it, and we don't even understand neural networks exactly how they work out things. It's a black box, really. And we don't understand our own black box up here.
I agree with you, but neural nets are an utter mystery to most of us. You can tweak them, but they are more like the human mind in that they are difficult to understand. Whereas at least if you do it in a more algorithmic way, a more digital way, the chances are you will get some ideas which you can actually communicate, because you can either agree or disagree with it at the end of the day. If you have if then else, you get somewhere.
Yeah.
But the measurements, if then, the condition might be a very complex one with all sorts of probabilities in it. What is it? Miller's magical number is the holding point. That is the number of items you can manipulate accurately in your memory at one time. And that's 7 plus or minus 2. And for most people, it's 5. And for most medical decisions, it's a lot more than 7. Or it should be. Anyway, thank you.
I think
No, thank you. I love these philosophical debates. I do.
Brilliant.
I think what doctor once said to me that doing medicine is not dissimilar to a car, maintaining a car in a Haynes manual, except half the chapters are missing.
So someone in our trust uses that analogy. Yeah.
Brilliant, everyone. Should we now take questions from the floor as well? I started with online because it's easier to manage the floor. So from the floor, if we have questions, please feel free to ask Mark.
Obviously a lot of frustration.
Oh God, you can feel that, can you?
What comes across there is what you see in many other organisations as well, where actually the people doing the work, which the organisation or the business does, isn't actually being served by the IT departments and systems.
Work as visioned, or what do they call it, versus work as done.
What we say, supporting, well, IT is a lot about information management. You're not getting necessarily the support to innovate and actually change the way you work, as opposed to the other way, which is we're going to tell you how you should be working because it suits our systems. Where you're saying you've actually got to think about, as you say, the pathways, the workflow, and how you have to be quite flexible with it. And a result that comes back may not meet your original diagnosis, so you may then go for something else, and then try and home in on something. But the same must be happening in every other department, where you have things which are quite complex, and there's not just the disease itself, but many other factors around that, the patient, their health, their food, all these other sorts of things.
Genetics.
Okay. So I suppose really, I wouldn't be surprised. There must be equivalents to yourself, probably in many other trusts, who basically says, I'll do something about this. All I hope is that actually they get more support than you do. And they will probably be going down some similar conclusions. And so I think, did you say your health informatics type discussion boards and other things is the only way you can actually see what's happening in other places and see actually if this is all quite common.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Let me just summarize that for people online in case they didn't hear. Is there more of me out there, and are they getting further than I am? So the answer is there are more of us. There's about 70. But for an organization that has 1.2 million employees, there's not many. I don't even know what that is as a percentage. It's tiny. There's probably a bit more, but those are the verbose ones on our discourse forum. Yes, we have a forum where we talk about these things, and there are some amazing people out there at different trusts who I rate highly, and people that are freelance as well, that actually go out and do things and make things happen and change things for the better, digitally speaking, doing things that work for the frontline clinician. There are people just as frustrated as me out there as well.
More questions from the floor? I took some notes. I think I have some questions that they might have, but they don't think about it, maybe. But I know because we had a meeting about, we have our MSc Health Tech meetings on Wednesday.
Okay, yes.
Before this. And you mentioned something about the challenges with accountability because of the lack of digital, digitalization in the NHS systems. And, I think when you mentioned about the WhatsApp thingy and the messages and how to do this accountability, and I have Wayne working on that and working on accountability and looking into that. What do you think is the current state of accountability in the NHS for these kind of things, digitally speaking and medically speaking as well?
When you say accountability, what do you mean by that?
I mean, as for instance, we were talking about you say 5 different experts giving 10 different diagnoses or something like that. When it's right, when it's wrong, there are problems. We were talking about the timeline for the pathway. I know some might be because they couldn't do anything about it, but some might be because they didn't do something about it. And with the lack of digitalization, we also have a lack of accountability as well, don't we? Or what are your thoughts on that?
All right. The legal definition of accountability, or who's in the right and who is the wrong, is if you have a cohort of doctors, do they think a fairly similar thing in the same situation? So more than 5, let's say 10, 20. And if they all think this way, that's the way it should be done. Now, if another doctor comes along and does something slightly different or very differently, and the patient comes to harm, then that doctor's in the wrong and they're accountable for that thing done wrong. So legally, that's how it sits. Now, let's say in 10, 20 years, you have clinical decision support systems, which is basically AI machine learning that has learned from 10, 100,000 data sets what to look out for in a history and an image and then come up with diagnosis. Now, if it gets the diagnosis wrong, this is going to spin your question on its head, but if it gets it wrong, who's accountable then? And we don't know the answer to that. Now, so what your question is kind of in between those two, and I'm not entirely sure how to answer it. That's why I haven't really answered it. But who's accountable if something is digitized or not digitized? Are you saying not digitized?
Both, actually.
Okay. If something's not digitized, well, there's not enough.
We have right now, isn't it?
Yeah, not digitized. So the current state of play. So things not being digitized, they're like I'm talking about in Oxfordshire, there's 47 vacant positions for hematologists in the country. There's not enough doctors around and health staff and admin staff to do the work, to do the clinical, to do the admin work. There's no system to actually hold, all these things that need to happen for the patient, the blood tests and the prescriptions. And who's accountable when a patient comes to harm? In most cases, no one specifically, but let's say a patient comes to harm, then they make a complaint and they'll complain to the person that runs that department. But what can they do because they haven't got enough money or staff? So I haven't got an answer, but that's the situation. And I hear those situations a lot, unfortunately, especially since COVID's come along and made things harder for people to do things. It's not an accountability question, but there's someone to blame. There's a scapegoat to the end, but yeah, it's not a simple answer. I mean, it's a really good question, but it's not really a simple answer to give.
So I would imagine when you mentioned, that a lot of the communications are made through messages, email, and so on. I would imagine that a lot of information gets lost in this email.
Yes. What happens if that email gets lost that you opened last week and you forget to then open again and act upon? And this is why I want to have a Jira for healthcare. I wanted a management tool that actually I'll send you, Tiago, a thing to do. And you can open the email or open the thing to do, but only once you tick done, do I know and everyone else know it's done. At the moment, we do not have something like that. Why? I don't know, because a lot of the time I get emails every day. I must have like 30 a day, which I'll open. And I have to make sure I unopen them so then I can find them later. Now, if I haven't done that technique properly, it'll be opened and I won't look at it later. I had an email just like that today, which fortunately I remembered like that. Oh, I need to do that. But that's a dangerous state to be in. And imagine you're getting 40, 50 emails. Clinicians do quite easily with patient sensitive data and patient critical data, safe data. One of those things slip through, the Swiss cheese effect. Yeah, and then if it happened to me yet, then I would be in the wrong in that case. So that's a lack of a good system to actually make sure to-do lists like that one we talked about happen.
And let me add a bit more spice in
this
conversation. So then what happens when you have a system like Spiritum Dual that could improve so much, and then you have the problems of not being able to implement and so on. And this has something to do with accountability as well, or what do you think the NHS, or how do you think the NHS sees that? You see, Because that's one of the problems. You have a lot of innovations that you have all those 70 you mentioned, right? Other frustrated people out there developing so many innovative things and ways to improve patient care, and they're not being implemented for whatever reason. And this is certainly having impact on patient care, clinicians' work, and so on. What are your thoughts on the accountability of that?
In some ways, it's easier to say no because everyone's scared of new and change. And I think that people can understand that. But we can't live with the status quo. It's falling apart as it is. Patients, for lung cancer, they have surgery in Bristol. There's no way of the data being transferred properly. You can transfer an image, but that's pretty much it. Everything is like email, it's paper-based. There's no nice interoperability, no nice API transferring data backwards and forwards. Spiritum do it. Why not put it on both sides and do everything? That's politics, that's culture. And actually, from the PG dip that I've done throughout the whole last year, that is the biggest hurdle in health tech. The technology in my mind is not that hard. Yes, you need to sit down and build it, and that takes a while. But the technology is already there. We've been just mimicking what Amazon, Netflix, Facebook, a lot of the time we've mentioned, are doing already. We're just mimicking them. People have done the hard work. We're just copying what they've done, but actually making it happen in an organization that's the biggest in Europe. With its, it's been around for how many years? It's just almost impossible. It's possible, but almost impossible. And we're slowly making a change.
Aren't there some people issues going on here as well, though? Because if you take NHSNet, which has been around for a very, very long time for sending secure email within the NHS, which you use daily within the hospital, if you go to a GP's practice, in the last year, GP's practices fighting against COVID and not being able to be in touch with patients face to face, it has actually heightened the information about the fact that a lot of people in the NHS don't know how to use the systems they've got. So I've had 2 instances in the last year where GP's practice has sent sensitive medical note by open email to somebody outside the NHS without using the egress function of NHSNet to send it securely. And you've got a huge GDPR data breach there. And you can't, it's annoying when it happens, but you have to question whether even some of the basic systems the NHS has got people are investing in the training and the use of them properly, when a practice like that, where 2 GPs practices completely separate, can be sending emails external to the NHS without even understanding the basic precautions. And I remember talking to the practice manager and saying, let me explain to you how to use NHSNet properly. And at the end of my 30 minutes showing her, she said, well, thank you very much. I really appreciate that. And I just do wonder whether at one end, there's lots going on that's very complex, but at the other end, are we just failing to use some of the very well ingrained and embedded systems we've already got in a better way?
It's a good one. So it's about emails and EPRs, I think. And so the GPs use EPRs as well. They just have their own systems. So emails, I think there's 1.4 million spam and phishing emails received a year in the NHS. So just that, and if 1 or 2 of those leak, credentials to a sensitive system, and I can log into my, should I say this out loud? I can log into my trust sensitive systems from the internet now. So if I lost my credentials to someone that's phishing for them, then that's it. All the patient data will be lost. So it's serious stuff.
Yeah, and I guess I'm misunderstanding of using basic systems.
Yeah, but there's definitely that. Training is an issue. Now, in terms of EPRs, so there's 3 for the GPs. Now, I think there's about 10 or more for the trusts. And when a doctor, a nurse, a pharmacist move from one trust to another, they have to learn a new system. I like to think about it. It's like a cockpit, an airplane. A plane can fly up and down, left and right, and yaw and everything like that. But the cockpits are all different. You have to be trained for each cockpit. So each EPR you need to be trained for. You know how to basically, you know how you want to get from A to B, but the actual controls to do it are very different. Why not have one system to control them all? But that's another higher up NHS digital management, senior management idea of convergence of EPRs, which has just come out in the last 2 months, which is where they want to get rid of all the different EPRs, the smaller ones, and make one big EPR. So it's I'm almost thinking the same thing, but for my open source modular thing.
Yeah.
May I pop in from the net?
We got time, yeah.
Right, quickly, quite different thing. You started talking about security there as well. There's reports around that the NHS suffered quite badly from the Russian hack last summer. Is that true, or is there any indication it might be true?
So Ireland suffered quite badly from that ransomware. 2017, we had ransomware again with WannaCry. I'm not a cybersecurity expert, and I'm never going to try and pretend I am. Has the NHS suffered from these things? It sounds like it, data breaches and so on. Also, was it St. Thomas's? One of the hospitals has had in the heat wave. I don't know if it is the heat wave or not, but they've had trouble with that as well, and data not, all the digital things not being accessible. I don't know the ins and outs, and I don't know how widely broadcast. We've talked about the damage done by ransomware and all these cybersecurity issues, but I presume, one, it's going to make the public trust the NHS less, which is a terrible thing, because you need to trust doctors to do the right thing for you, and you need to trust the digital systems. That comes back to accountability to do the right thing for you. And then patient personal data is being lost as well. So even if it's just the idea that patient data has been lost, that's going to stop patients coming to doctors to get seen for diseases they have, which they have to see them for.
Yep. Agreed.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I don't know if we have more questions from the floor. No, any more questions online? No, so thank you very much. I would like to thank Mark again for this amazing talk. I would like to remind everyone that this has been recorded, so it'll be available in our BCS website for anyone who wants to go through it again or share. Feel free to do so. In November, we're going to have yet another talk, and it will be on network security in the healthcare. And we're also going to have our AGM, so be emailing everyone on that as well. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mark, for everything. And for the ones that did come on to the face-to-face part, we have food. That's a good thing. If you are online, it's a shame, but you cannot have food unless you want to drive through the university, and feel free to eat and have a nice network here with us as well. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much, Mark.